I know it's been a long time since I did a video, but I ran into some issues. So I got quite a bit to cover, so I'm gonna get right to it. About 3 months ago, I started working on a tune with Lesotho Racing, and we ran into a bank-to-bank problem. But the nature of the retune was to try to fix the drivability, and I mentioned in a previous video, the car has a tendency to stumble, and it's got a rough idle, and even in neutral revs, any kind of light throttle or neutral revs, it has a dive, and I'll show you that in a minute. But I wanted to go through a couple of things first. So I changed the O2 sensors. That was the first thing I did to see if that would cure the bank-to-bank issue. I took it back to the shop that actually did the exhaust for me, and I had them take a look at the manifolds and make sure that they weren't leaking, because Don had, in the past he had experience with other turbo cars doing the same thing with a bank-to-bank discrepancy because of a leaky manifold. They tend to not work well with gaskets. So after the O2s, I changed the plugs and the wires, and the plugs that I pulled out were actually really good. They were chocolate, cocoa brown. There was no hot spots, no fouling, no nothing. And that didn't make any difference. So I changed the coil, and then I started looking at other electrical components. Of course, TPS is usually the first thing people look at when they're having drivability issues. And I ended up picking up a used throttle body from eBay, and we'll go to my car part corner of the counter here in the kitchen. So I picked up this throttle body, and it turned out that it actually had a bad IAC. But the first thing I did when I got it was I took the cap off for the throttle plate adjustment, and I put it on mine because I had blown mine off years ago. The joys of a turbo car. So I tried that first, no change. I swapped the throttle bodies, and there was no change for a couple of days, but it turns out that the IAC was bad on that, and coincidentally my MAF went bad within that same period of time. So I picked up a new mass airflow sensor, and I picked up a new throttle body, and actually it's a knockoff. It was like 80 bucks. And it works perfectly. There's no problems with it. It's got a new TPS. It's got, obviously the IAC works properly. The one thing I like about this is it's actually a completely sealed unit. That's not a cap with an O-ring. So no chance of that ever blowing off. Hopefully the IAC holds up. But it looks like it's the same quality as OEM. So anyway, that did not work. Next thing I did was I created a block-off plate for the EGR, which is still in there. That didn't make any difference at all. I changed the pigtail for the mass airflow sensor because I had extended it. So I figured, it's old. It's already been through 2 soldering jobs. So I just cut it off and I replaced it with a new one. And I also took the Diablo Mafia out of the loop. I'm running a 90mm pipe, so I don't really need the extra headroom that I would if I was running a 3-inch, on setting 2 for the Diablo. So Don seems to think that's going to be okay, and so far so good. Other than that idle issue and the constant drop in revs under light load and the hesitation, the car runs perfectly. The plugs are an example of that. At medium to high load or wide open throttle, there are no problems with the car at all. Another thing that I did actually, I'll go to the back of the car, was I took my Kenny Bell out of the loop. I've got a booster pump in there. So I took that out of the loop as well, and that made no change. And when I put it back in, I redid the wiring on that too. Soldered new connectors in and seal them up. So that's where I'm at. One thing that I haven't done yet and I'm going to do is I checked all of the fuses in the box here and in the car, and they're all good. Somebody on the forums had said one fuse in their in the main fuse box was blown, and the symptoms were pretty similar to what I was experiencing. So this is the fuel relay, and these two are identical. One of them is the fan relay, so I'm thinking about swapping them. But before I do that, I'm going to try one other thing. So about 3 weeks ago, when I was doing some research online, I actually came across one person that had experienced issues with the pedal position sensor. And given the symptoms of the car, it makes sense that there might be dead spots. People talk about flat spots, and you know, you can probably, some people may have experienced this with a radio dial, where you're turning up the volume and in some places it just doesn't register anything, and that's, I think, what might be going on with the car. So anyway, that's where I'm at. Oh yeah, I forgot, I actually changed the injectors too. Because of the bank-to-bank issue that I was having, I thought it'd just be best to change them to eliminate them as a possibility. And when I changed the plugs, one of the plugs on the driver's side was wet. That actually ended up resulting in a real improvement in the bank-to-bank issue. It eliminated it. Basically, it's maybe between 1% and 3% now from bank to bank versus 6 to 8. Sometimes it would creep even higher. So that's solved. Okay, let's go get the keys. And before I do this, one of the things that I've been working on that I was actually going to keep a secret until I was done is I'm doing a second gen interior swap. So you can't really see that door. That's a GT500 2012 or 2013 GT500 door panel. And then I've got a 2013 GT door panel over on this side. I wasn't too worried about the inserts mismatching because I'm gonna change them for custom ones. And I actually used the 2013 up mirror adjustment controls. It's my window controls because the signal is actually different. I think there's even a wire difference. It's a 3-wire versus a 4-wire, and it communicates different frequency to the smart junction box. So if you put the 13 or the 10 up in, it'll short out the SJB until you turn the power off and turn it back on again. But everything else matches up, the mirror control and the locks. And I changed the steering wheel, so it's a 2012 steering wheel, and the buttons are in rough shape, so I got to replace the buttons. And actually, this is in pretty bad shape too. I don't know if you can see that. There's too much glare. There's some probably damage from when the airbag went off, because it was a eBay purchase. So just one piece of trim that needs to be replaced, and then both the button sections. And I'm going to go with 2013 buttons because eventually I'm going to have the info center configured in the smart junction box. So I'll set those buttons up to work with the info center. And eventually I'm going to change to the single multifunction switch for the signals and the windshield washer and flashers. So, but that's pretty involved. It involves changing the clock spring and the collar for the switch mount because they're different. Open the garage door so I don't get smoked out. Alright, so it's gonna take a few seconds to idle down, but even as it is, you can see it's kind of hunting a little bit. And that check engine light is just because I've got the rear O2 sensors on in the tune, and they don't even exist. Oh yeah, and I moved the gauges. I put them in the vents. I got sick of going down into the footwell where they were before to see what my max boost was, or to adjust the boost settings. Let's see if I can speed up the idle down. I'm not even touching the gas pedal and it's diving. Alright, so the problem with free revs and, you know, just cruising or very light load is when the pedal is in a held position, if I can get it to actually stay in one position. Okay, I'm holding the pedal still. Alright, I'm gonna see if I can creep it up to $2,000. Look at the vacuum gauge while it's doing that. It's bone stable. Usually sits between 20 and 21. But even when it does bad idle dives, or bad rev dives like that, the vacuum gauge stays pretty stable. So anyway, that's the problem that I'm chasing. And I ended up finding the Dorman pedals are pretty cheap, about 120 bucks or something like that. And believe it or not, I found one on Amazon for 29 bucks because it's used. And at least if there's something wrong with it, I can return it. But I couldn't pass up that price to at least do some troubleshooting. It sucked if I ended up spending $200 and it turned out not to be the problem. So anyway, that's where we're at. And I've got more planned for the interior. NMRA or NHRA, they were messing with the quarter mile, the ET and mile per hour requirements for cages. And it was 4 point for 1149, and anything below 11 seconds was a 6 point. And they had changed that to 11 seconds for a 4 point and 10.8 seconds, I believe, for a 6 point. So this car, as it was tuned, was probably capable of mid-11s. So I was going to need a cage anyway. So when I am ready to do the cage, I am also going to finish the interior swap. And this is what I was talking about, the single multifunction switch and the clock spring. There's the clock spring. And that's the single multifunction switch with the wipers, high beam, low beam, and signals. So it would have been nice if the collar was the same, but it's not. So I got to switch out the collar, and the collar dictates the style clock spring. So that's why I have to change them both. Oh, and then here is the rest of the interior. It's the 2012 dash, 2010, 2014 dash, center console, brake, all of it. The only thing I'm missing is the airbag cover, because it was, I don't even think the airbag in this particular car went off, but he had sold it already. So, oh yeah, and I've got the top part of the center console there. And I picked up the boot for the brake for 44 bucks. And they try to sell OEMs on eBay for $75 for ones that look like they've been through hell and back. So, okay, so we're done. That's it for the update for now. I wish it was better news, but hopefully that pedal, which should be here on Tuesday, will solve this problem and I can get back to tuning the car and get this frickin' thing to the track.